So, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah walk into a bar. The bartender says, "Who the heck are you guys? I've never heard of you." Ba-dum-tsh. So that joke clearly is not funny, but it's didactic. And welcome to Bible Dudes. This lecture is about Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. These three prophets are a good test of biblical literacy. I mean, if you ever meet someone who can talk intelligently about Nahum, Habakkuk, or Zephaniah, well then that person most likely knows quite a bit about the Bible. The point is, these guys don't come up much in conversation or jokes. And here's where we're at in the Tanakh, which is another name for the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. We're in the Nevi'im section. Navi is the Hebrew word for prophet. Nevi'im is plural for prophets. So it's the prophets section. We're in the latter prophets, and the three prophets we're looking at are minor prophets. And here they are, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. And why are we examining these three prophets together? What links them? Well, they're all 7th century BCE prophets. They're all extremely brief, so it's difficult to know the editorial process. And they all subscribe to Jerusalem theology, and they all are associated with the city of Jerusalem that we see in this picture here. This is the old city wall we see the Dome of the Rock with the golden top in the background. That's where the temple would have stood in Solomon's time. So Jerusalem theology is an idea that Yahweh lives in Jerusalem in his house, the temple, and that's because Yahweh lives there, and he's never going to let Jerusalem fall to the enemies of Judah. They also have an idea with Jerusalem theology that David, a descendant of David, will always be on the throne in Jerusalem. So that was why we were studying them all together. Here are the final 8 kings of Judah before Babylon destroys Jerusalem, the capital city of Judah, in 586 BCE. So if we go up to the top, we have, and these are all descendants of David, right? But if you remember, Hezekiah was the king during Isaiah's prophecy when Jerusalem was besieged by the Assyrian Empire. Hezekiah had some religious reforms that focused on limiting worship to Yahweh. After he died, his son and successor Manasseh took over the crown. So Manasseh began with a co-regency a decade earlier, so he was in power for nearly 55 years. So that's a long time, right? Manasseh is king during a relatively peaceful time in the first half of the 7th century. So he's an Assyrian vassal, and the Deuteronomistic historian, the author of Deuteronomy, and has a large part of a role in telling the history in the former prophets. Well, the Deuteronomistic historian hates Manasseh because he allows his subjects to worship several deities, including Yahweh's main competitor, Baal, and also the fertility goddess Asherah. While things in Judah are pretty stable for the first half of the 7th century under Manasseh, when he dies, things politically begin to fall apart slowly. Mostly this is because Assyria starts declining in power, while Babylon starts growing in power. The next king is Ammon, who is assassinated, and then his 8-year-old son Josiah is put on the throne by the, quote, people of the land, unquote. These seem to be simple agrarians as opposed to urban elites. And we're going to hear a lot in the prophets about the people of the land. Then we have Josiah, who has religious reforms in the 12th year of his reign. Basically, one of his workers finds a document in the temple, it brings it back to him, and they read it, and they claim that this was written by Moses and that they should have been following all these religious practices. Basically, what's going to happen is they're going to limit worship to only one deity, Yahweh, and you can only worship Yahweh in one place, and that is in the temple in Jerusalem. So if you have a temple located somewhere else, even if it's worshiping Yahweh, they're going to destroy it. It's pretty controversial religious reforms under his reign. Well, Assyria declines in 612 BCE. Nineveh falls, that famous Assyrian city, and there's a power vacuum. And Josiah dies when he's trying to stop the Egyptian army from joining the Assyrians against the new Babylonian Empire. So he gets shot in the Jezreel Valley. And so why is he trying to stop the Egyptians? And why on earth are the Egyptians fighting against their enemy, the Assyrians. There's a lot of questions about this that we really don't know, except maybe the Assyrians and the Egyptians team up because it's better to fight with an enemy that you do know than an enemy that you don't know, such as Babylon. In any case, Jehoahaz is the first of Josiah's 3 sons to rule Judah. After he's on the throne for just 3 months, an Egyptian pharaoh, Necho II, removes him. Then we have Jehoiakim, who's the older brother of Jehoahaz. Well, Syria is falling apart. Carchemish, we have the famous battle in 605 BCE. And then we're going to have Jehoiakim put in power when Jehoiakim passes away. I always remember the order of Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim by the last letter, alphabetically, where Jehoiakim comes before Jehoiakim. M comes before N. So Jehoiakim, with an N, ruled only 3 months, and then he's taken away to Babylon. And then we get Zedekiah, the final king. He rebelled against Babylon, and he paid a steep price. He has his children killed in front of him, and then he has his eyes poked out. So again, all of these kings belong to the Beit David, or House of David, and that's one of the longest dynasties in history. One final point before we start with Nahum. Remember, with the 4 prophets in the 8th century BCE, their prophetic activity took place in the latter half of the 8th century. Right? First half, not a lot, but then they're all clumped together in the last half of the 8th century BCE. It seems when times are peaceful and prosperous, there's not much prophetic activity as compared to times of danger and potential destruction. So with events like 722 BCE, with Israel destroyed and the 10 lost tribes, and 701 BCE with the Assyrian army destroying Lachish, this powerful city in Judah, and then surrounding Jerusalem, the time seems to be right for prophets to have a receptive audience. We don't have prophets in the Hebrew Bible then for the next 50 years. Manasseh is on the throne, and things seem pretty stable, so not a lot of prophecy. But then, again, we see a series of prophets working in the latter part of the 7th century. We have a tumultuous set of events focused on the collapse of the Assyrian Empire, the power vacuum, and the rise of Babylon. Some key events are the destruction of the capital city of Nineveh in 612 BCE, and Josiah is shot at Megiddo in the Jezreel Valley, trying to stop the Egyptian army from joining the Assyrians around 609 BCE. And then the end of Assyria is marked by the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BCE. I guess the main point here is that the end of the 8th century and the end of the 7th century, we get a lot of prophetic activity because the time is politically chaotic and the people of Judah face annihilation from their enemies. All right, on to the 3 prophets, starting with Nahum. In Hebrew, his name is Nahum, and it's a word that's related to Noah of the famous flood. It's a word that means comfort. All right, and the editor lets us know that this book is going to be about Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrian Empire. It starts off with a superscription, an oracle concerning Nineveh, the book of vision of Nahum of El-Kosh. So, again, it's going to be about the capital city of Assyria, which is Nineveh. And it's not clear where El-Kosh is located, as this is the only time it is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Some scholars believe we should identify El-Kosh with Capernaum, a fishing village on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. The theory is that El-Kosh changed its name to Kafar Nahum. Kafar means village, Nahum refers to the prophet Nahum, and this later became Capernaum. Here's a picture of an early synagogue at Capernaum, but this is unclear, this identification of El-Kosh with Capernaum, but what's clear is Nahum's message. So, it's typically divided into 3 chapters, where its first part celebrates the end of the Assyrian Empire, and again, 612 BCE, Nineveh, the capital city, falls, and 605, the Battle of Carchemish. It's all falling apart. And the author believes Judah has suffered, and no further punishments are necessary. All right, so let's look at this passage. King of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. All who hear the bad news about you clap their hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? All right, so again, Assyria is falling apart. And anyway, here's a picture of my son. His name is Gilgamesh, and he's standing in front of an Assyrian lamassu at the Oriental Institute in Chicago. So that's not going to be on the quiz. All right, meaning of Habakkuk is unclear. It might have something to do with an Akkadian name for a fragrant plant, or something to do with the Hebrew word for embrace. But in the end, I'd have to say we're not real clear about the meaning of Habakkuk. And notice that the editor identifies Habakkuk as a prophet using the Hebrew word navi. This is the superscription, the oracle of God which Habakkuk the prophet saw. All right, so remember that label prophet is often a negative thing, so it's unusual that he's called Habakkuk the prophet here. In fact, he's the only pre-exilic prophet identified as a prophet. Otherwise, with this superscription, we get very little. Nothing about who is king, nothing about where he's from, who his dad is, and all that. That's most likely because the editor didn't know. All right, Habakkuk is famous for theodicy. Theodicy means literally judging God, but it's also trying to figure out why bad things happen to good people and vice versa. So it's honestly and profoundly addressing the problem of why a just God allows wicked people to oppress the righteous. So let's look at Habakkuk chapter 1. How long, Yahweh, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife, and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallows up those more righteous than themselves? I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. So Habakkuk asked God some very tough questions about, why is all this horrible stuff going on? And then he's going to climb up to the watchtower and wait for the answer. And here's God's answer. See what you think about it. Let's look at it. Then Yahweh replied, "Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets, so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he's as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the peoples. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, 'Come to life,' or to lifeless stone, 'Wake up.' Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." So the answer is kind of complicated, but it seems to be that even though a prophet can't understand, divine justice will come in time. The author is sure that Yahweh is working through history, but they're not sure of the outcome. But they're also making fun of people who worship idols made out of wood and stone. All right, so Zephaniah, in Hebrew, Zephaniah, and the name means Yahweh has hidden. The idea is that he whom Yahweh has hidden, or Yahweh lies in wait, something like that. All right, well, let's look at the superscription. It's longer than some. The word of Yahweh which came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. So he's the only prophet with 4 people in his genealogy. And notice that his father's name is Cushi. Cush is I know today Cush is a term used for marijuana, but in the Bible, Cush is a nation that's south of Egypt, I guess the modern area of Sudan today. So it's interesting that Zephaniah's father likely came from that area. All right, so he's most famous for his expanded prediction about the apocalyptic day of Yahweh. He says it's going to be a reversal of creation. Look at that graphic for apocalyptic stuff. All right, so let's look at this idea from Zephaniah. The great day of Yahweh is near, near and coming quickly. The cry on the day of Yahweh is bitter. The mighty warrior shouts his battle cry. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and against the corner towers. I will bring such distress on all people that they will grope about like those who are blind, because they have sinned against Yahweh. Their blood will be poured out like dust, and their entrails like dung. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of Yahweh's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. All right, so it seems to be some sort of reversal of creation. And just want to point out, in English, when you're reading along and it says the day of the Lord with all caps, in Hebrew that says the day of Yahweh. So, he says the day of Yahweh is coming because of religious syncretism, but the future after the great and terrible day of Yahweh will be great. But in any case, day of Yahweh certainly sounds like a pretty bad day. So before we end, let's try that joke one more time. So, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah walk into a bar, but they never get around to ordering drinks. Nahum is too happy taunting the dead Assyrians. Habakkuk is waiting on top of the bar for tough answers from God to his questions about justice. And Zephaniah is preaching about the end of the world. But the end.